Yeah, I love it. I had the plans for it. And then it was stripped from the old. Yes.
Well, I bet Chair Price would pass it on.
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, if you really feel like it.
Yeah, on your way out the door, Dennis, you can go. Where you can go to the party. We just thought the three of us are done this, the end of this year.
Oh, yeah. It's true. Better be a big bash.
You know, it's kind of nice as we, I just sit back and.
That's right. You had the joy of always kind of sitting aside.
Yeah. We could probably have it at the Starbucks down in the Marine District or something like that.
A little
Go hard.
We'll all out. We're ready? Thank you, Nelson. It was pretty impressive how fast you were able to do that.
I know I can do that.
Well, I'm somewhat, I can be very sympathetic for it. There have been various times when I've driven all the way down Philly. Only to realize that I have forgotten this, which gets me into the parking garage. I gotta go back to here to clean it. I just, get me into the parking garage. So
We're ready to go.
let's just stay with that so long.
All righty. Mr. Richter?
The Ohio Elections Commission meeting of August 12th, 2021. I would take the roll. Ms. Tavares.
Here.
Ms. Kaufman.
Here.
Brahman. Here. Mr. Norman. I am here. Let's try that again. Ms. Cunningham.
Here.
Vice Chair Beatty. Here. Chair Price. Here. All members of the commission are present, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Richter. The first item on the agenda this morning would be approval of the regular meeting minutes of July 15th, 2021. Everyone should have received a copy of it. Are there any additions or corrections? Acknowledge and a motion that they're approved. So moved. Motion by Mr. Norman. Who was the second?
I think it was
Mr.
Mr.
Pasha. Okay, that's fine. All in favor of the motion to approve the regular meeting minutes of July 15th, 2021, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Okay, I'm so inclined to raise my hand. I just did after all the virtual meetings. So, well, I think we're waving at or something. All right, moving on. The preliminary review. The first item is Bishop versus Solito, case number 2021D-004. Mr. Richter.
Mr. Chair Price, members of the commission, this is a disclaimer complaint. This is which the complainant asserts that the respondent did not include a proper disclaimer on a campaign sign. We've received a response that I basically outlines for you and essentially denies all the allegations. It includes a picture of the sign, of a sign that he had that does reflect a disclaimer on the bottom right corner. It did include a series of statements from persons who said they had signs in their yard that he attempted to say were affidavits, but unfortunately for the complainant or for the respondent, none of them were properly notarized and just simply had a notary public signature on them. But he did provide a response. He did provide a picture that showed a label. He also asserted that the picture that was included in the complaint, if you look at it carefully, did happen to cut off the bottom right-hand corner of the sign where he says he put all of the signs. If you look at it carefully, it did. And so my recommendation to the commission, I'll be glad to answer questions you may have. My recommendation to the commission is find the violation.
We have any parties here this morning, Mr. No parties, so no parties, no council.
I don't know if anybody else felt, I found an objectionable that they took a picture of cutting off the corner. And that's it. And I tried to blow it up because I couldn't see the disclaimer. Yeah, so even as I blew it up as much as I could. But if that's how you base a complaint, that seems to me a bit frivolous. If you're taking a picture, and you're cutting off what allegedly is the disclaimer in the corner of the material. I don't know if anybody else had any thoughts about it, but I thought that, why are you wasting our time?
Are you suggesting we look at the issue of sanctions?
I think if you're gonna be complainant, and you are going to cut off the corner of a photograph alleging that somebody did something wrong, when everybody else says it's there, I think that's potentially sanctioned, yes, I think that's a waste of our time, and a waste of the respondents' time.
Mr. Richter, as a matter of procedure, would we first of all act upon the, your recommendation, which is to find the violation, and then after making a decision on that, then we issue the website?
That is, finding that there's a violation. I will simply add that there is oftentimes, people will add stickers to their materials, and those stickers can tend to fall off. Because people will often engage me in conversation about, what they can do to mitigate a situation where there isn't a disclaimer. They talk about putting a sticker on there. I don't discourage them from doing that, but I always make sure they are aware that I realize that still could fall off. It could be a sticky problem and problems. So I'm not saying that's the case here, because it was interesting that Mr. Norman pointed out, and the respondent pointed out, the bottom right-hand corner of the picture did not include it, but I throw that out there for general information.
In my mind, this is a little different because you have affidavits from people who had signs in their yard who said it had the disclaimer on it. So I don't know why you would print and run with some and some without. It just doesn't make practical sense to me.
All right, let's look at the underlying complaint first, and then make a decision on that, and then look at the issue of whether we want to set this matter down for hearing on the issue of sanctions.
I move that we find no violation.
I give a motion to follow the executive director's recommendation and find a violation. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Donis. Discussion on the motion. If not, all in favor of the motion, go ahead and find no violation, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Seven.
Only seven of them, but I don't get them.
Okay, all right, moving on to the,
Did you want to address any other issues?
no, that's what I'm getting to. Sorry, moving on to the issue of sanctions. Do you want to have further conversation about that at the moment? Is there anybody else that has thoughts on whether or not we should set this matter down for sanctions?
Well, do we know for sure that the complainant actually took the scissors and cut that off? I mean, did he have?
No, but I think when you look at the picture though, it's just
The photo cut it off.
the photo
Show
cut
the
it
right
off.
hand corner with the disclaimer.
The photo cut off the bottom right hand corner of the picture that he took of the sun. And that's where the respondent was saying he had put.
Intentionally did that.
Doing it, and that was a part of the respondent's response, which I circulated to all of you, which was, this guy, not only is he's a supporter of a person that I'm running against, and therefore he had it in for me, but he did this to that picture. That was part of what he said.
It just seems to me, if you're gonna take a picture, show the whole sign. Don't cut off the corner where we have evidence that there were other signs with this disclaimer placed upon it. Again, I couldn't read the disclaimer and I tried to blow it up as much as possible to see what it said, and I couldn't, but at least it's been referenced and recognized that there was a disclaimer. Anybody else?
Other commission members?
What would be the process? Set it for
Just
hearing notice him?
notice him and set it down for a hearing on the issue of sanctions.
Yes, is that the process? No.
What I was just looking, trying to get the rules to come up, and of course, they don't open up for me. You never want to open up for you, really open to. No, this is out of my ski drive. This is out
Not
of
this.
huh?
The hard drive?
But yeah. Yeah.
You can just get it.
Sorry for.
No, that's fine. Take your time.
While he's looking, does anybody else have opinions aside from me about maybe second for hearing and dealing with this?
My opinion is that we already found no violation. I think we should move on and not those sanctions. That's my opinion.
Other commission members?
I share.
I'd like to know the procedure.
I'll get it some year.
Sorry.
Hopefully 2021.
We know it's available online.
It's good to be back together again, isn't it?
In an action before the commission, if the allegations of the complaint are not proven, the commission takes the action as described in. The commission or panel of the commission may find that the complaint is frivolous. The commission, the panel so finds, and the commission shall order the complainant to pay reasonable attorney's fees and to pay the cost of the commission or panel as determined by a majority of the members of the commission. Costs paid to the commission or panel under this provision shall be deposited into the highway commission. That's 3517-155.
But that doesn't say it calls for the hearing.
No, so it's saying anytime we find a new violation, then we can impose sanctions.
But how would we know what the penalty is
Yeah.
without any
And
evidence?
that's why we have generally speaking, when we've done that, we have held a subsequent to say, okay, what are the costs? Have you had attorneys be, what are our costs? Well, all our costs have been in personnel time, so. We have generally held subsequent reviews in the past, let's put it that way.
Right, but it seems like it's not just a punitive penalty, it's just a reimbursement of these costs, right?
It seems to me if you're talking about frivolous conduct, then you can have punitive action to it. Not
Not our rules.
Well, that's the statute, that's the statute. That's the statute. That's the statute.
And what did the statute say, what is it, what can we impose?
Wait for it.
Is it in 35?
35, that we do. Yeah. Everybody wanted to do prayers. Stuff over. And so they go on.
Page 67.
They found the other reason that they cost of the one people, obviously, vision. And it costs, they paid it out, we looked at those.
Yeah, it's singular.
Pleasure, commission. We want to, we have a motion to accept that. Okay.
I apologize. 3517, in any case, in action before the commission, whether before a panel or before the commission, if the allegation of the person. And they order the complaint takes off, but the cost paid, the commission shall be deposited to watch the commission from the citizens of the utilized by the commission. Assess attorney's fee, commission may hold a hearing to establish the reasonable. Shall take them.
So say the hearing is for attorney's fees,
Yeah. That way.
Yeah, of course. but it's not for the imposition of.
And not for on your finding, or frivolous or the specific cost, correct?
In this particular case, did the respondent actually retain an attorney?
No, you file a response on it. At least that's all that was submitted to the commission.
So all we do is really cost, which would be the cost of us being here anyway. I say we want.
Agreed.
Agreed. All right. We're just up in there. We'll entertain you.
It's already, they're already done violation.
Okay. That's good then. The next case is Hicks versus Schmidt, case number 2021G-0005. Matter coming on for preliminary review. I need to recuse myself in the matter because the conference, we were asked to that one. The vice chair would step out until this matter is completed. I asked the record reflect that I will recuse myself in the hearing.
All right, in this matter, Hicks versus Smith, 2021G-005.
Chair, you want me to go down and lay out the basic outline?
Yes, please.
Okay, so before you start with the respondent, essentially, I'll provide complete information with certain campaign finance reports, accepted direct corporate activity, and campaign finances. The response submitted a motion to dismiss, so the complainant did not know the proper source of knowledge. In addition, additional materials were filed in the last couple of days, really from both parties. Making additional statements as it relates to why the reports were complete when originally filed or when subsequently filed, and additional comments in an amended affidavit submitted by the complainant. All those materials have been circulated to all of you. Based on the materials that have been presented, my recommendation is to find a violation. You can certainly hear from Mr. Hicks, who is here, who is the complainant. Mr. O'Brien is here representing if chair so chooses.
So did you mention there's a motion to dismiss? Also, I think.
Yes, I said the requirement submitted a motion to dismiss based on the complainant's failure to invoke personal knowledge appropriately.
And the commissioner comes with the investigation.
Well, I guess I would ask, Bill, what you rely on to do recommendation of no violation?
Well, the complaint essentially primarily gets down to whether certain information was included in campaign finance reports. The submission tag and or in the report, in the subsequent reports, that materials were provided to the Secretary of State's office that we can reflect the filings. The reports have been accepted by the Secretary of State office. So that's the primary basis for my recommendation. Based on the material that we have provided to us. I'm obligated to make a recommendation based on the materials that are provided. As a part of the original complaint process.
But why aren't you mentioning the emails that it provided that says where the resources are being paid for? So you're selectively talking about.
I just testified until you this morning, and I've been on a commission now coming up 5 years, and historically, we've heard from both complainants and in this case, counsel and respondents. So we're going to do that. Let's have them. Obviously, survive it. You need to swear in this, and if they have something they need to add in addition to what's been submitted, I say we do that.
Okay, I'll say that.
That's fair.
Well, let me ask before you do that. I heard Mr. Richter give his explanation as to why he recommends no violation found. So in all filings made against Mr. Hicks' position, most, I think, are centered on personal knowledge.
Mhm.
Did that enter into your deliberation or into your mindset as to your recommendation, no violation?
No, it did not. I mean, certainly that is, we hear from Mr. O'Brien, if you wanted to hear from him further, the other ones included in the original submission. The general approach that I take toward a complaint is, does it include what I've always looked at is essentially the 5 basic elements: plaintiff, respondent, proper addresses, a written statement of the case, an original signature, and a proper notarization. If those things are there, then I put it before the commission. And then, certainly as the commission looks at the materials, and as the other, well, in this particular case, as Mr. O'Brien has done, the party wishes to make an argument that there isn't sufficient personal knowledge reflected in the materials that we have, the commission can take that under consideration as well. Considering all of the materials that were included in the complaint, while certainly agreeing that Mr. Hicks never used the words personal knowledge in the complaint, considering what's contained in the complaint in terms of the review of all the materials, the materials provided, et cetera, to me, that's sufficient in order for the commission to move forward on a matter such as this. And so I did not take the motion to dismiss in consideration by the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's kind of the standard that I operate under as I'm going through this process.
Colonel Brian.
We can certainly do so. Mr. O'Brien, if you come up be on the response side, Mr. Hicks, if you come up be on the complaint side. That's the dismiss first. Do that, and Mr. Hicks, certainly for this.
You know what, I think that if you're on the motion to dismiss, that would.
Okay. Mr. O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Richter, Mr. Vice Chairman Beatty, other members of the commission. Appreciate the opportunity to say a few words regarding this preliminary review, which at least has 3 separate allegations in the affidavit that was filed. They deal with failing to report a contribution, which is alleged to have been an in-kind contribution by the Ohio Republican Party, failed to properly report expenditures, and then thirdly, accepting an illegal corporate contribution. I'd ask the commission to consider each of those separately, and in reviewing the complaint, it struck me that having observed affidavits, whether they're in a criminal case, whether they're in a motion for summary judgment, they start off with based upon personal knowledge and belief. The affidavit here did not do that, and throughout, as the complainant listed the facts that he supposedly relied on, the facts were unconnected, disjointed. They were 2 emails suggesting attendance at a meeting in Claremont County, and another suggesting that this person had been added to a Facebook account. That was it. And Mr. Hicks makes bold-faced assertions, conclusory allegations. Well, these folks worked on the Schmidt campaign. No basis. I didn't see him go door to door. I didn't see him hang signs. I didn't see him attend a meeting. None of that is in there. They're just bold-faced conclusory allegations that I think when the commission and Mr. Richter reviewed, I think you can easily conclude that he has no underlying facts he's presented to the commission regarding that. He's attached a pay stub from Ohio Republican Party for one of the parties involved. However, that's for a time frame of March 8th to March 21. And the email he attaches is dated February 11th. I mean, how is that connected? Even if Mr. Mancini was on this payroll, there's no indication that he was on the payroll for purposes of helping Ms. Schmidt. In fact, just the opposite. I went the additional step in an addendum that was filed that has an affidavit from the executive director, the former executive director of the Ohio Republican Party, Rob Seekauer, who says flatly, without hesitation, that Gene Schmidt's campaign, that Mr. Mancini had not been directed, not been paid for any work in connection with that campaign. And so we have first, no direct evidence from Mr. Hicks, but secondly, we have the ORP saying we didn't pay him. And certainly, if Representative Schmidt had received from ORP notice of the in-kind contribution by that employment, that would have been included on the report. Prior to the general election, her report, her pre-general, does reflect, and it's attached to the supplement that was filed on Monday. She reported an in-kind contribution from the Ohio Republican Party. She and her treasurer know how to report that, and when they get noticed, they do report that. And at least, as you all well know, this is not a strict liability offense. If Gene Schmidt has someone who does work on her campaign, doing anything, and she has to know that they're being paid before she would report that as an in-kind contribution. And having been candidate myself, 10 different times over the last 50 years, you receive a notice from the entity that's doing the payment, and you include it on the report. And so the complaint on its face is insufficient and doesn't confer jurisdiction on the commission. And then I think secondly, when we look at the evidence that was submitted, or the sworn statement, it doesn't establish a violation. Secondly, what the argument and allegation is that a corporation was engaged, and because apparently the only argument could be made because they were not paid upfront in advance for their services, that somehow was an illegal corporate contribution. The filings that are attached in my supplement that was previously filed reflect that Ms. Schmidt's treasurer properly filed a report that listed an invoice or services. That invoice was for $164,000. That report that she filed reflects $100,000 payment and an outstanding balance of $64,000. So a vendor, and that's who it was, a vendor did work for the campaign, submitted an invoice for $164,000. She paid $100,000 of that, had an outstanding balance of $64,000. The very next report she filed, and that's also attached, reflects she paid that $64,000 in the interim, and she owed that vendor $0. And that's not an illegal corporate contribution. It's a vendor who does serious services, who happens to be a corporation, who is partially paid. That's reflected in the report. And then in the subsequent report, that also is accurately reported and reflected. So either on any of the three allegations that are in this complaint, I submit the commission should follow Mr. Richter's recommendation and dismiss it, because there's no personal knowledge. There is no probable cause of a violation of Ohio election law. And unless the commission has any questions, which I'm happy to answer, I will conclude in my remarks.
Before we turn to the opposing party, if anyone has any questions.
I just wanted to, for the record, I don't believe, sir, that Mr. Richter said his recommendation to find no violation was predicated on personal knowledge. That wasn't an issue.
I think that's what you did say.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
All right. Seeing no questions.
Yeah.
I do.
And so there's three. First off, I appreciate the discussion of personal knowledge as a citizen. not an attorney, I think it's ridiculous that you have these attorneys that constantly have this personal knowledge thing, which would say that in an investigation done by a citizen, for example, getting records and so forth, and examining them and reviewing them would not be personal knowledge, right? I think your personal knowledge thing would be good for you guys to have an opinion on this, because it's nonsense. I think what it's more intended for, should be intended for, is things where you have maybe a straw filer, where a political opponent gets somebody to file something for them, to get to where they don't have their name on it. And that would be wrong. But I can assure you, anything I ever file here now or in the future is based on my knowledge, my research, my hard work. Okay, and I resent the constant implication by these attorneys that it's not.
It's not a connotation, it's just a matter of law. When you file an
May I
affidavit.
continue my remarks? Okay, without interruption,
Well,
please.
you're not going to tell me what to do, Mr. Hicks.
Okay.
And an
Go
affidavit
ahead.
is supposed to be based upon your personal knowledge, and you're supposed to swear and attest that it's your personal knowledge. And if you didn't do that, then that's on you. That's not on us.
Okay. Again, I love the warm perception here as a citizen. So there were three things alleged in my affidavit. One was that JPL and Constant Content staff were working with Gene Schmidt, Stephen Caraway, Tommy Rolfe, Anna Lippencourt, Megan Fitzmartin. Okay, those were never reported anywhere. They were not reported even on her filings of the $164,000 related to Constant Content. Those filings specifically said that they were for media, airtime, and mailings. I personally know, because I've interacted personally with Stephen Caraway, that he was being paid by Constant Content under Churn Free Consulting and was working with the Schmidt campaign and the Freeman campaign, as were other people. That has nothing to do with the ORP. Also, the resources were being directed by, not the ORP, but by people from JPL. So that ORP staff was almost entirely directed by, and you can, I have exhibits here, there's exhibits in the other case, almost entirely directed by Tommy Rolfe, telling them what to do, where to go. So Mr. O'Brien said at one point, he said, all I had was an email showing that he was being directed to attend meetings for Michigan. And all I had was an email saying that he was being given rights to administer and moderate her Facebook page. Absolutely right. That's two of the things I put in there. That proves what I'm saying. So the point of I looked because of his last minute filing. So Mr. O'Brien filed the affidavit from Rob Secor, which I think makes more questions, not less, around this matter. Doesn't resolve anything. It just says we weren't the one directing Mancini as to what he was doing. That caused me to go look. I didn't have time to respond to it because it was only submitted Tuesday at 5. So I haven't even had a chance to investigate the law or understand what's being asserted within that in his last filing. But it caused me to go look at your rules and find the section. Alternatively, as the commission does not believe there is at least a possibility that a violation of the statute has occurred, but is not convinced that that's the case, the OEC could then decide to set a matter for a full and complete hearing. So do we think there's at least a possibility? Well, let me talk about two of the other things, because I mentioned the Constant Content JPL resources. We talked a little bit about the ORP staff. Let's talk about in my amended complaint, where I got more information from the Secretary of State of the notion that this campaign, the Gene Schmidt campaign, was advanced $164,000 for paying for media and airtime. I'm still, the staffing's over here. It's not accounted for anywhere. The staffing, okay? For media and airtime that she didn't have in a race that she won by 318 votes and then paid back later. Now, I don't have evidence to support what I'm gonna say right now, but I think part of the reason that it even got declared is because I put so much heat on the system in Claremont County about financial reporting and campaigns. So contrary to the director's recommendation, I believe that this should have a full hearing. And he made a lot of misrepresentations. He failed to mention the email. Mr. O'Brien, you mentioned that I had a pay stub in there for somewhere in March. But I also had the ORP reporting in the system that showed a pay for February 21st. So Mancini wasn't just being, if you look at mine, Mancini, it's exhibit number in mine. I don't just have a pay stub, I have the actual ORP reporting in the campaign finance system that shows all the pay stub. which is, yeah, it's exhibit, number 1. On 2/21, he was paid $2,286.33. So he failed to mention that. He made it sound like, well, it was a different time period. He put in his filing stuff relating to the general election. To the general election, when she was then being supported by the ORP in the general election. That has nothing to do with the primary. It has nothing to do with this constant contact money. So I think in my affidavit, I think these cases are sort of the canary in the coal mine on this household stuff. Because we know, if we're honest people, that, you know, something fishy is going on in terms of this money getting fronted through Jeff Longstreth's campaigns into these candidate accounts to a massive amount of staffing being provided that was never accounted for anywhere. So the notion that there's not at least the appearance, at least a possibility that a violation of the statute has occurred, it to me is absolutely ludicrous. The 2 emails are enough. And he puts things in his filings. I'm not even a lawyer. He puts things in his filings about probable cause. That's not your standard. That's not the standard here. So again, we have got to fix the integrity of campaign finance in Ohio. This is the board. You are the people. And I provided more than sufficient evidence that there's at least a possibility that a violation occurred. Might I remind you that if she was fronted $164,000 from a non-lending institution, that's illegal. Okay, I know there's some rules like your family member, stuff like that, but if just another blue person gives you up front you a lot of money, that's not proper. So again, I think that what we find with the Freeman thing and what we find here is that I think I have provided more than enough information that there's a possibility of a violation occurring. I think you talk about helping me sometimes with being able to get discovery on things. I think discovery would open another can of worms here. This matter, and it really came out of the discovery related to the Freeman matter. I don't know if you guys understand, but Claremont County was the epicenter of Larry Householder stuff, of constant contact money flowing around. There were literally for 2 House races, if you look at the money, what we'll talk about later, the other things, but something on the order of $500,000 to $600,000 fronted to campaigns through Jeff Longstreth to both the Freeman and Schmidt campaign. And later we'll talk about where those numbers come from and how you can add them up. Because they're coming from documents, they're not just coming from thin air, they're coming from documents. That's in addition to growth and opportunity tax money that was spent in Claremont County, which I don't know that number. People speculate that it's at least the same number. $1 million of money getting spent on 2 House races. There is absolutely at least the possibility that violation of statute occurred. But I would say also to dismiss such a thing today, when he filed stuff into the case Tuesday I wrote down the exact time. Tuesday at 5:10 p.m. is when this new affidavit appeared, without me having any sufficient time to respond to it. So I think either this needs to be, I think it should be set for a full hearing, or it should be continued, because also, as I brought up to the director, 2020 G019, the Freeman case, that one is going to reveal more stuff that intertwines with this case. To dismiss this case now, when there's another case that involves that people bought media and so forth together in concert, would be, I think, not in the interest of the citizens of Ohio and not in the interest of campaign finance integrity in our state that we so desperately need. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Hearing no, any questions? No question. Probably response coming from.
I could get a lengthy response, Vice Chair Beatty, but I'd like to hit 2 things quickly. I don't know where Mr. Hicks is reading these things from, but because of his past history of doing that, I brought you rule 3517-1-11, preliminary review and hearing, subsection A specifically says that the commission will determine the jurisdiction, sufficiency of the complaint, and whether probable cause exists. And I think quite clearly that is the standard that the commission should use, and by rule says it will use in deciding whether or not this goes forward to another hearing. What Mr. Hicks wants to do is to have this separate hearing so he can start taking depositions, so he can start sending out discovery requests. And that has been, by my observation, in the other case that he referred to, he thinks he's a one-man Claremont County grand jury looking for everything that happens in the state of Ohio that he disagrees with and is using this commission for that purpose. And I just think that the commission should not allow itself to be used for that purpose. The allegations, he stands up here and says many things, but none of them are in his affidavit, his sworn statement, which is not on personal knowledge. So at least I would ask the commission to find that the complaint is insufficient on its face and to dismiss it. And thank you for your attention.
Before we comment and promote, the Commissioner Norman or company, just for the sake of the commission.
Called out.
But to, for the sake of everyone, speak to the standard for a motion to dismiss. What the standard is that we might have to read.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cunningham.
In a motion to dismiss, you have to post it in the fast. The complaint in the civil rules, you would have to post it in the fast and that complaint to approve. And that there isn't any additional evidence that it has to be considered based on the complaint alone. And if you determine based on the complaint alone that it doesn't sufficiently address a cause of action before the court under which under any theory there could be recovery or reward or
Look at the
success on the
evidence,
merits, then it must be dismissed.
evidence in all likelihood in their favor.
Everything in their
Same
favor.
as the rulings of motion for summary judgment.
But there's no additional evidence. It's strictly based on the basis of the complaint.
And based upon the complaint, there's no set of facts that we can determine that they're entitled to
That
recover.
they could prevail.
Correct.
Now, preliminary reviews a little bit different, I think, I did actually find that in this pretty cool. Still playing correctly states that really is a little bit different than the motion to dismiss. People allows you to consider both sides. So the commission can consider both sides, both the what was originally filed and any responses and affidavits that were filed, we consider it all. So it is more of a probable cause hearing, rather than a motion to dismiss. It's a lower standard, but it's a standard that considers broadly more things. Because we can consider the response, and consider all of that. We can hear it as a full panel. We consider both sides, we would weigh that in the determination. But if you believe that probable cause of this, that they could prove a setback of circumstance, that whole full hearing. I don't think, at least I don't find the standard that Rex is talking about. Our standard is whether it's a question of the material facts and dispute or enough information that we believe it should be sent over to a whole hearing for the commission. It's not the criminal law standard. I don't think that Mr. Brian will be used to. It's just like a standard. But it's still, you're still looking at it to determine whether you could find with more evidence you could find that there was a violation. I usually have that as a pretty constant. I mean, it's not a very sound off of it, but when we did put it out, it's something that I can go to Mr. Richter.
I think that's fair. And that's part of the reason why my recommendation is not based on the motion.
Yes.
I think it is sufficient. Even though it wasn't stated, there was some personal activity, even if you want to know what's in personal knowledge, that you could impugn into all the materials submitted and taking all the material that did it, et cetera, that we go to that level. And yeah, I think what we're looking at here too is, if similar to the first case was one where we had sufficient evidence to fully determine all of the facts of the case, and say there was no violation. This here and looking at, again, my recommendation is based on them, because I'm obligated to give a recommendation based on the complaint responses, excuse me, and make make that recommendation. If there is a belief that there is a sufficient probable cause, then we should set the matter for a hearing. I don't believe that there's a sufficient showing of a complainable violation at this point. But I feel again, my recommendation to find no violation based on all the written material. We certainly heard comments. Commission members could be impacted by those comments. I wouldn't necessarily. So and that's kind of where I'm coming from. But like the guy, I was, more than I had a motion to dismiss, as opposed to assessing all of the documentary materials and comments that have been presented to the commission today and then proceeding today.
I have a question, Mr. Ricker. I heard the words come out of Mr. Fick's mouth, which was maybe a continuance of the preliminary hearing because he just received the affidavit on Tuesday evening. I'm all in favor of due process. Does that affect your opinion at all?
No. I'm been doing this for a long time. I'm used to receiving, various materials at various times. That's accepted, but anytime we're leading up to that, accepted. Then I'm used to getting material. Last minute, I got responses in some of the preliminary or the group recommendation cases over the last couple of days. Like my recommendation.
As a procedural matter, recommend a violation because a motion to dismiss. Would it be a recommendation of a motion to dismiss or a motion to find that violation?
Mine is a recommendation. I mean, if I would ask about this, yes, I would agree with this and find no violation.
Here's what I think that we should do. Let's hold the motion to dismiss at a ban. And let's see if there is a motion to accept the executive director's recommendation to no violation. There a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any additional?
Discussion on it.
Yes, discussion and question, yes.
From my perspective, I would say that it's not really a fun line for me. I understand that, I think that the other side applicants tend to get that, but the side tend to get that a little bit more slack than lawyers courts tend to. They're still held to the same standard. Law as if when you choose to be pro se, you don't get on relaxed standard road. Get a little bit of leeway, just in terms of approach. And I think that was part of Phil's comments about the applicant not as sufficiently established technically personal knowledge. Lawyers might look at that more technically, as Mr. O'Brien was, Mr. Trauma alluded. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So that's something that's something else. So it's but I think, just saying that because I investigated and you still have to have actual personal knowledge. You can't just I took out a good side and unsubstantiated allegations. There could have been affidavits, of these people that I was working for this, or I received money for this. There was some severe allegations they could really, but I just, and certainly they were paid. They were employed by someone paid by them. But, I have to agree with Mr. O'Brien when he's saying there are a lot of allegations here, but the dots aren't good. There's not established a direct relationship of the filing of a complaint without some kind of a tie together. To me, is problematic. We have documented public evidence about what was filed and invoices and those kinds of things accurately reported. Other information so I'm troubled by all of that. So for me, it did not rise to the level of establishing enough of a probable cause for us to say. I don't know that would be raised to the actually establish a complaint that had that. When you were saying that in a preliminary review, it has, if there is no violation, I would to fill on that issue, because never researched it, but that's. You gotta do more than just allegations about people to show direct connection and some information from them or someone. Or somewhere, that's not just a hearsay, but it's.
But that's the way not only place to say, this is the one case. You have the information, you bring it here, and if you can't prove it here, then you can never bring it again in the future. And so it's basically saying you can't get 2 bites of the apple. And so if you have the information, if you have the evidence, if you have the testimony or affidavits to support it, you bring it here. And if we go forward and find no violation, he doesn't get the opportunity to bring it again.
Separate. It goes to,
You said this on the civil side of the cases, and it's called the law of the case, It's basically wrapped in with race judicata, but it says you don't get 2 bites.
yeah, but it's preliminary use kind of different than merits.
It may be.
Violence.
And I think they could even say, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm trying to
I don't
think.
know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really had that specifically for you before. We have had certain cases, as I recall, where, race judicata has been open. I think that, I would tend to think that a finding of no violation here based on what we have would preclude subsequent filing on those same particular issues. But if other material were found, even if it involved the same pardons, then that could be brought back. It's kind of like I'm sure Mr. O'Brien will argue double jeopardy. It's kind of, we're quasi criminal and just can't be tried over and over again for the same offense. If you can't prove it, you can't prove it, it's over and done.
So that's my sort of rationale.
Any more, questions on the motion?
Well, I guess what troubles me, Mr. Hicks is alleging that if we would remand this to a full opportunity for that, he might establish proper cause at a violation. If we just summarily dismiss this case, then that's forever taken.
The underlying facts also, have to do with other related cases. Violating. That if it's just go away forever, that would be very full merit.
That's one of my concerns. To define the violation or dismiss it, that you're not going to be able to bring the same issues for in other.
The same place with the same items, with the same issue.
Whether the parties on it, I don't. Yeah.
This is the motion to follow the executive interpretation of a violation. I just found my 2 cents in there. It seems to me that you're not getting a penalty open up the fishing expedition. It is the complainant's responsibility to come before us. Put them on it. And I'm second the motion because I don't think that's kind of.
Any other comments?
I guess, again, I would just reiterate that I think, I'm not concerned about any additional people that might be brought into this, particularly in this instant case. And frankly, I don't know how he gets the facts unless we remand it to a full hearing. And then the facts might or might not support Mr. Hicks, but we won't know until that time.
We have a motion, second. Catherine, do you have any opinion on your motion still?
Yep.
Sounds like we need to have a vote then.
Okay.
I would do it
I
by
think a roll call vote.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Ms. Kaufman?
No.
Mr. Bromer?
No.
Ms. Tavares?
No.
Mr. Norman?
Yes.
Ms. Cunningham?
Yes.
Mr. Beatty?
Yes.
That motion is tied 3-3. In order for the commission to take an action, it requires 4 votes.
I'm not sure where we're headed. It seems as if the no vote, if you want to move this matter down.
But I think that would be the next one.
I'm not an attorney, so please bear with me. I move that we set this matter.
All in favor?
Roll call again?
Okay, right.
Except for the way out. Mr. Donnelly?
Yes.
Mr. Norman?
I'm gonna vote yes.
Ms. Cunningham?
Yes.
Ms. Tavares?
Yes.
Ms. Kaufman? Vice Chair Beatty? Yes. It passes. Going to be set for that, the hearing, that, the matter will be set for hearing at a date to be determined by Commissioner Sapp.
Can I ask you a question? I understand you did not hear, rule, or decide on the motion to dismiss, that it was just the preliminary review making the determination whether to set it for a hearing, and that the motion to dismiss would be heard later.
Well,
At least that's what I understood.
Maybe.
Mr. Beatty is.
that's true. I mean, I think it's kind of, I guess the motion somewhat moved, but if.
You're getting my-
For the
I'll wait till we're done
formality,
discussing.
vote on it, we have to vote on it.
Well, at least
Go ahead.
following up, and the reason for the question was Ms. Cunningham's inquiry about whether to consider things outside of the complaint and the other information. There's quite clearly the affidavit from Mr. Seacard is unrebutted, and that was attached to the motion to dismiss. Or supplement, I should say, to the motion to dismiss. And at least, I'm satisfied
Well, I-
that you hear the motion at a later date, but I guess I'm just trying to clarify that.
Which only goes to the issue of employment, right? Doesn't go to the issue of the other questions.
Correct. And the in-kind contribution from ORP to the Schmidt campaign.
Well, there was no.
And at least, well, secondly, it did go to the other issue because it included the filings that would suggest that anytime the contractor or corporation, if you don't pay them upfront for services, that you're taking an illegal contribution, but quite clearly isn't the case. So at least I'm just trying to clarify. So I'm not trying to.
I believe that, I understand the point, that you may jump in here. To help me with it. I think that as you presented it now, it might have to, while limited. As for. That relate to application as well.
So at least by machine dismissed until subsequent executive.
I think discovery has to take place, and so there would be a hold or a step on any type of ruling for the discovery being complete. We had a discussion on judgment, despite Mr. Clear's admission. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
Move on to. Okay. Let's go back on the record item. Thank you. All right, the next matter to be, morning of the group consideration. On the name of Ray. First two cases are 2021 R-128, 2021 R-160. Dismiss is simply, just a simple dismissal. I just let me double check. Yeah. We obviously didn't get sufficient. In the previous case, we dismissed it because I got notice from a person that the candidate here, Mr. Guarnieri, who is currently in a nursing home in California, and unable to participate in anything like this before. And so we dismissed the prior matter. We need to be better in touch with the Board of Elections to clarify for them why the matter should be dismissed and have they should bring the guy back at the beginning before us. And so that's the conclusion there. Oh, okay. In 160, the respondent, in an email to me, submitted a timestamped copy of campaign finance report that reflected that it had been made timely by June 9, 2021. So therefore, I recommend we acknowledge. All right, so we just go ahead and dismiss this without any action. No, I think the board should act. All right, so then we need a motion to go ahead. So case 2021 R-128. 2021 R-160, right? Second. Discussion. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next group would be the good cause, case 2021 R-118, 2021 R-131, 2021 R-165, and 2021 R-168. Recommendation of the executive director is on violation of the good cause, not imposed fine for prosecution. Conditions consideration one. Item number, or case number 2021 R-135. I moved it to the wrong down in that should also be in the good cause category. Brandon called the fourth. It's item number 28. I copied it into the wrong area. I apologize. That should be a part of the good cause recommendation. All right. So then just review quickly for the record. 2021 R-118, 131, 165, 168, and 135. Correct. Entertain a motion to follow the recommendation of executive director. So moved. Second. Further discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next category, $50 fine. Case numbers are 2021 R-112. 2021 R-116, 2021 R-117, 2021 R-26. R-160. Engagement executive director, find violation and impose a fine of $50, Mr. Richter. So, all these folks, other campaign finance reports, discriminating
explanations, the previous that would lead me to believe that those errors caused.
Questions, Mr. Rick? I'll entertain all the recommendation of the executive director. Second. All in favor, motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Next category, $100 fine category. Three cases, R-129, 2021 R-130, and 2021 R-161. The recommendation, executive director, fine violation and
Two of these cases or report were filed, but was submitted, in case over 2021, commission had a previous case. A candidate cause, and so after a second time,
Mr. Richard. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second the motion. Second. Second, then the motion to find violation and impose the fine. By saying aye. Next. Sorry, number 50, fine. Case number 20.
Hello. I don't know. I'm trying to watch the Ohio Elections Commission. I can't tell if they gave your case a full hearing or not. So you need to be prepared.
Fine, back again for another time. The report was filed, no response was submitted to the commission, so I'm recommending a $250 fine.
Is this Hinkle?
Yes. John Hinkle.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and the reason I brought it to everybody's attention, I saw the filing due date was January 29th, and it was filed February 1st, so 1 day late. It just seems to me that's a bit penal, and then pretty much declined, so I would move that in front of violation, but fine them 150 instead of 250.
All right, we have a motion that would go ahead, find violation and impose a fine of $150 for a second.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, the next category of cases, 2021 R-119, 2021 R-141, and 2021 R-147. Executive director recommends finding a violation and imposing a fine of $25 a day with a reconsideration option, Mr. Ricker.
These cases involve generally persons for first time, or maybe they have previously had findings and and are now back again, but the reports have not been filed, so therefore I'm recommending the position of a pretty fine. I'll go ahead and then respond to each of the subsequent ones, and two, each recommendation is based on the prior matters, where they may have had a finding that they're back again, or the next two consolidation matters where they had an outstanding cases. And I'm recommending that we consolidate those and impose the $25 at any time, but the reports are still outstanding.
Okay. But clearly we're addressing right now, 2021 R-119, 141, and 147. Correct. Questions of Mr. Ricker with respect to those two cases? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Motion. Second.
Second.
Motion has been duly seconded that we follow the executive director's recommendation of $25 a day with reconsideration option. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to consolidate the case 2021 R-127. Recommendation of the executive director, consolidate the case number 2020 R-239. Find a violation and impose a fine of $25 a day with the consideration option. Are there any questions of Mr. Richter? Okay, a motion to follow the recommendation of the executive director. You have second.
Second.
Motion is duly seconded. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next case is case 2021 R-162. recommendation of the executive director is to consolidate the case number 2020R-405, find a violation and impose a fine of $25 a day with reconsideration option. You want to address this? Mr.
Yeah, all the remaining cases are circumstances where the reports have not been filed with the Board of Elections. So obviously, we will impose a per diem fine. Hopefully encourage those persons to file those reports before the fine. So we can grade on now.
Thank you, sir. Questions of Mr. Richter? I'll entertain a motion to follow the recommendation of the executive director. So move. We have a second.
Second.
And for the discussion, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next category would be case number 2021R-148 and 2021R-150. Recommendation of the executive director is to find a violation and impose a fine of $25 a day with reconsideration option with payment of $250. Questions of Mr. Richter? If not, I'll entertain a motion. I take a motion to approve the recommendation of the executive directors or second.
Second.
For the discussion. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next case is case 2021R-122. Recommendation of the executive director is that we find a violation and impose a fine of $4,850 plus $25 per day of reconsideration option. Any questions of Mr. Richter? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
We have a second. All right, we have a motion and second that would follow the recommendation of the executive director. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next item is case 2021R-113. Executive director recommends finding violation, imposing a fine of $90,825 plus $25 per day with reconsideration option. Questions for Mr. Richter? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Follow recommendation.
Second. Good, second.
Second. For the discussion,
I think the motion fine executive director's
recommendation, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next item is case 2021R-139. Executive director recommends consolidating case number 2021R-2020R-477, find a violation and impose a fine of $25 a day with reconsideration option and payment of $20. Questions of Mr. Richter? Now I entertain a motion. So we have a motion in a second.
Second.
For the discussion. All in favor of the motion, follow the recommendation of the executive director, signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next item is case 2021R-158. Recommendation of the executive director is to find a violation, or consolidate the case number 2020R-404, find a violation and impose a fine of $25 a day with reconsideration option with payment of $250. Questions from Mr. Richter? I'll make a motion.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Motion's been moved second to approve recommendation. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next category cases. Case 2021R-134, 2021R-140, 2021R-144, 2021R-153, 2021R-155, and 2021R-159. Executive director has recommended finding a violation for the fine of $19,300 plus $100 a day with reconsideration option. Questions of Mr. Richter? If not, let me entertain a motion. Second.
Second.
For the discussion, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Carries. Next case 2021R-125. Mr. Richter recommends consolidating with case number 2020R-238, find a violation and impose a fine of $19,300 plus $100 a day in consideration option. Questions of Mr. Richter? And motion. Okay, second. All right. All in favor of the motion to approve the recommendation of the executive director, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Case number 2021R-167. Executive director has recommended consolidating with case number 2020R-483 by violation. Imposed a fine of $19,300 plus $100 per day with reconsideration on. Question, Mr. Richter? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
You have a second. Second, do you have any questions, comments? All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next category of cases are case 2021R-123, 2021R-156, continue upon request of the respondent. Continue by the chair.
Correct. Nope.
All right,
Those
those two cases, 123 and 156 will be continued. Next cases are, excuse me, yes, again. Next cases are continued for service, 2021R-111, 2021R-112, 2021R-114, 2021R-120, 2021R-121, 2021R-124, 2021R-133, 2021R-136, 2021R-137, 2021R-138, 2021R-142, 2021R-143, 2021R-146, 2021R-149, 2021R-151, 2021R-157, 2021R-163, 2021R-166. Chief, you couldn't have helped with that.
I can try to figure out.
All right, those are continued by the chairs, yeah, right?
Correct.
Yes, yeah, very good. All right, which moves us then into, motion.
Before we go on, can I just
Yes, of course.
our executive director a question about these continuing service? Well, I noticed as I was looking through the ICWs that they don't return the card. They're not signing the card. I got your certified mail. How long do we allow for those individual cases to go on?
Well, you know, we try and send out notice sufficiently in advance so we can get certified mail service back. Lately, I think there's a bit of a question mark in terms of how quickly we can get things back. But, you know, and obviously that's out of our control, the postal service, and when they get it back to us. You know, we'll stick all these cases back, and if somebody actually does get reports filed and comes to us, which I doubt on most of those service cases, you know, then probably in about 4 months, we'll put those back up before the commission again, for a preliminary review, send out notice again in advance, and this time, based on what has occurred, if we've gotten something back, we send out, even if it's a rejection, we send out by regular mail, and we get a serve, we get a student service based on that. And so they gotta go back into a hopper and we'll bring back, again, in about a 4-month period. And hopefully by then, something either green card will come back or we get certified. We'll get the letter back from the postal service that says that it's been unable to serve or been unclaimed, whatever the case may be. And then we can go from there. Okay, that's our normal process.
And just for the benefit of the commission, what happens if you never get certified mail service, then I'm giving you restriction.
That's when I'll come back and I'll recommend that we dismiss the regular service if we consist. If we get regular mail, if we send out by regular mail and that comes back as unbelievable, regular form, and we'll go ahead and lose dismissals. And we've had a couple of, I don't know about why, but we've had some cases where we've had 3 or 4 where that has happened. And then subsequently, a board gets a new address, something else occurs, and you actually get service on somebody, and it's actually in their findings are made. It doesn't always happen, but it does happen every once in a while. So
I have a question on the civil side of things. If it's an individual, such as a candidate, are we allowed to serve the Secretary of State if the first 2 attempts at service fail?
I have never looked into doing that. I've always dealt with just the information that we receive in terms of mailing and send it to them. And in an effort to try to notify them.
I'm just thinking there's one more name proposed to dismiss it. Because in the civil suit, if you don't get certified mailing, you can do regular mail. If that fails, then you can obtain service. Because a lot of in the civil cases that are going after the insurance company, not the individual. But this thing, you can say, we got to use service and we can dismiss it. That's after one of them.
But in those cases, you're talking about going to the agent for the corporation.
Secretary of State,
Director?
that's who you serve.
On the individual.
Because that's what they had to apply to get to have a driver's license in the state of Ohio.
I think we can get that.
No, but that's deemed service under the civil rules. And maybe it needs to be a trend general, one of the two.
I've not historically done that. I've not historically dealt with the information you get. We go back to the board of elections and see if there's an updated, Mr. Treasurer, what their, voter registration is, we'll try to get all that information from the board and sending out subsequent notice that, we would historically done with it. But I've not tried that.
It's not gonna, it is their team, they've done it before us, but.
All right, any other comments before we move on then?
Sorry, no.
No, thank you very much. All right, the next matter is case 2020G-019, Hicks versus Freeman Hall. As I've done previously with this case, I need to because of conflict. That's not ask the gavel to come here. I'll ask the record to reflect my recusal, the fact that I did talk to you.
Before you do that, we finish this motion. Do you have any other business?
Then adjourn.
Well, there is something that.
Yeah, I think we want to talk about an issue that
Okay.
has come up, so.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I
Thank
would
you.
find it this
No.
on the bill.
You're very.
Dismiss him from the building.
Go sit in the hallway, would you?
Then good coffee order.
Yeah, that's really not.
All right, David, would you like to?
I would do my best to bring everybody up to this. Is obviously case number 2020G-019, versus Freeman. This matter is currently set for hearing. Full hearing at our next meeting, probably 6. We've had some preliminary motions arise in the intervening period. In the effort to bring people here on schedule, bring me back for information for consideration. We have motions from Mr. Bride to quash subpoenas for Alan Freeman, Dan Freeman, and Susan Jones. We have Mr. Hicks' motion to compel Mr. Freeman regarding interrogatories. Mr. Hicks' motion regarding the sanction against Mr. Freeman. Mr. Hicks' motion for recusal of Mr. Bride from this matter. And Mr. O'Brien has submitted a motion to quash the subpoena for the so those are the motions, and then we have received motion in opposition to Mr. Hicks on the respective quash requests from council, and Mr. Bride has filed. Mr. Bride has filed certain information as it relates to Mr. Freeman and Mrs. Freeman. Or Mr. Freeman in his status as a witness, I guess you could say. And so I have them listed, in that order.
Squash the motion.
Squash
the subpoena, squash the subpoena. Move the third. Takes the motion.
Mr. Hicks had motions for the delegate Freeman regarding interrogatories. And Mr. Hicks the delegate saying Mr. Freeman for failing to appear. And Mr. Hicks had a motion that was refused on Mr. Bride.
For purposes of efficiency, can we just have the parties stay entertained instead of going to podium, so they can keep their notebooks and notes in front of them, instead of having to that and thing.
I appreciate the opportunity. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I
I'm so used to doing it formally, it's difficult for me to be with.
I just think a pretrial, and you sit at the council table and the judge lets us do that, but if that's what you prefer, go ahead.
So the first that I have, taking the order in which I list them, I tried to do them chronologically, but would be Mr. Hicks, Mr. Hicks' three motions, one for the quash the subpoena for Mr. Freeman, one quash the subpoena for Mrs. Freeman, and then motion to quash the subpoena for Ms. Jones. Before we start though, Mr. Bry, I will interject as it relates to the circumstances concerning Mrs. Jones, or Ms. Jones, Ms. Jones. Has that been resolved between you and Mr. Hicks? Well, I know there were discussions going on about her willingness to testify, but just not on the 26th.
What Mr. Hicks has proposed is acceptable to me if it's acceptable to the commission, which is to say, watch this subpoena for the 26th. She'll be at my office at 3 o'clock and we can do a deposition there, both sides to be submitted for the hearing. I mean, I'm fine with doing that. If I wanted to ask whether the commission would further we do it that way, or whether wants to sit here or here, she can be here in 15 minutes if that is the commission's preference. I don't care. I only care about whether or not she can show up.
Will it be a video deposition?
I don't think it will be.
I'd like to respond on this one.
Okay.
Let's see if that.
That's fine. In other words, I never know if I agree with something that Mr. Hicks asked for, whether we've had anything before time.
So,
If you just limit it to.
we're just talking about Susan Jones,
Yeah.
who's the campaign treasurer for Alan Freeman.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bray submitted something like the partial subpoena, then she was gonna testify here. Then I said we could do a deposition in your office maybe. I have not made arrangements for a court reporter because he never responded to me. And previously he has not, his client has let me finish talking. Previously can I ask that when I'm talking, he sits down?
No?
Okay, so, okay, then I'm gonna stand up. We're gonna play dumb games and I'll play dumb games so I'll stand up then, so you can stand next to me. So I have not made any arrangement for a court reporter. This is the first I've heard of Mr. Bray that now he wants to do something at 3 p.m. The note from Mr. The other thing he proposed is that she would testify before the whole commission here, where you have a court reporter today. And I think it's a little bit out of order. It's a little bit odd, but it was actually said in what Mr. Bray sent, what Mr. Ritter sent out. Mr. Bray's motion, I'm reading off of his note to me and him. Mr. Bray's motion to quash the subpoena for Susan Jones with a motion in opposition for Mr. Hicks. Consideration of allowing Mr. Jones' testimony on August 12th will be so considered and incurred. That was referring to here. So because he offered to have her come here to testify and he just did again. So if we want to have her testify, I'm prepared to cross-examine her and have her testify here. But this notion all of a sudden at 3 o'clock in his office, which I had proposed, to be honest, I did propose, but I never heard anything back from him. And the last time I proposed a deposition, nobody showed, so I didn't want to incur additional expense while I had an open motion on another deposition where he didn't show for. So if she wants to testify, I'm glad to have her testify here and examine her here today in the 15 minutes when she can get here. But not 3 o'clock in his office on something he's dropping on me at the last minute that now he wants to do that.
So, Mr. Hicks, I have one quick question. So are you prepared, I mean, with your questions and you
Yeah.
would be okay with you if she did?
Yes, I think it's highly irregular,
It is. It's not
but
like
I
a
wanna
regular.
I think we could have the case on the 26th with no witnesses. I could be the witness, but I'm prepared to cross-examine her right here, right now, or not right here, right here, today. Here, I'm not prepared to shift Fields to his office at 3 o'clock on something I proposed that he never responded to. And it's my understanding that what he wanted to do was have her testify here before the commission.
But it's my understanding that it's your subpoena and you desired her to be a witness testify on the 26th.
Yeah, because she's the campaign treasurer, which
Understood.
I just want to, we're not kind of addressing the whole merits of the thing, but just ponder the notion of a motion to quash with the campaign treasurer for the campaign and testify. It's crazy. It's crazy. So anyway, but if she wants to testify today, here with your court reporter, as was suggested by him, I'm going to do that. If you guys take the time and
Can I ask a question of our executive director? he's going to be getting the discovery deposition of Ms. Jones today. Does that mean that it will just be counsel, Ms. Jones and Mr. Hicks? And then we would get a transcript of this for our next hearing?
That was the expectation that I would have.
Okay, thank
That was the expectation that I would have,
Even if Ms. Jones testified today.
yes.
There weren't gonna come.
Well, from the commission's perspective, I assume we would consider the testimony as we heard and saw it, I think what Mr. Norman is saying, to make sure that the commission would then have a complete record. It would be integrated into the record from the hearing. It wouldn't be read in again because we wouldn't hear the witness again. Correct? Am I right?
The problem I have is, I don't know, and I've had dealing with Mr. Hicks before, I don't want to sit here all afternoon while he goes through questioning. My preference would be is if he's going to call a witness to testify, he can get whatever information he wants, and we get a copy of the transcript for review for our next hearing, which is on the 6th.
Or we would not hear the testimony.
Correct.
Mr. Hicks, do you know how long you anticipate the?
Not long, but, and I find it, I resent constantly being insulted by Mr. Norman. He's never sat through a questioning of somebody by me. But the point is, there's not enough time now. This hearing is in 2 weeks on the 26th. If we're going to hear her testimony, my belief is the testimony should be before the commission. And we're just making an accommodation for that testimony to take place outside of the normal hearing. The notion that we're going to get a deposition done and get the transcript and you're going to review it and all that stuff, when it's a 2-week period till the hearing, is not, I don't think, time-wise feasible.
It happens all the time. I do it all the time.
Congratulations. Thank you.
May please the commission, beyond this point, I think we can probably arrange to get a public forum if that's the preference of the commission. And I will try, I can't promise, but I can really try to see if we can get video deposition as well as that, if that would be the commission's pressure. If the commission would prefer to have it here live, we will get it here live. I believe, however, that Mr. Hicks sent a notice of deposition for her to testify at my office at 3 o'clock today. So I'm the impression that that's what he was expecting. You know, someone's surprised that company.
What is Ms. Jones' availability?
She had like she told me she's 15 minutes away from here. She's 15 minutes away from my office. Right now, I told her, you don't hear from me, be there in time for 3 o'clock deposition. Now, if the commission wants to do it another way, we will do it another way.
If you can arrange, first off, I just wanted to note that the commission, the constant use of the same thing that is field in a favor, Mr. Bray and other attorneys, that sometimes, so when it's a deposition request for Alan Freeman versus here, and the responses that I get, sometimes it's okay, but if Mr. Bray can arrange how far are your offices?
Because we're from Mary Jones, I don't know.
How far is that? Okay, so close. So if you can arrange for a court reporter, I'll pay for the court reporter, and I'd be glad to accommodate your 3 o'clock deposition. Mr. Norman's point, but then I'd ask if it's video, that's great too, but I just would ask the commission that it's a very unusual thing to take the testimony out of sequence of a presentation of the case. And so I'm making an accommodation in doing this. So I think his motion to quash the subpoena should be denied. Okay, but that's something in terms of you're going to allow a substitute that there be a deposition that would take place today. And if Mr. Norman is correct, that's adequate time in the next 2 weeks, we'll get all the transcript done and it'll be before you.
We have a court reporter sitting here today who's conducting our hearing. Are you available this afternoon at 3 p.m.?
Unfortunately, I'm not.
Okay. I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hate to suggest this in the middle of our motion here. If you give me 5 minutes, I can call the secretary and see if we can get that set up.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Can I ask one
Let's take a
question?
5-minute break.
I have a procedural question on that. Do you need a video deposition? Obviously, a video deposition is extremely more expensive for me. Okay, so if we think we can do it and it can be a transcript deposition, I don't necessarily want to have to confer. I mean, it's very unusual with video depositions unless it's an injury case or somebody's on their deathbed. So somebody said video deposition, and I don't even know what a video deposition costs, but I think I'm setting myself up for a pretty big cost with that. So if we're going to do it, I would just do a regular deposition for the transcript.
So let me suggest this. I am only available till 2 o'clock. other commission members have commitments to. I don't know what they are. So from my perspective, if we can, only on my calendar alone, I don't speak for any of the rest of you. On my calendar alone, if we can finish up the motion hearing and finish up testimony, I can stay till 2. Cannot stay beyond that. We could just have it here, have it live, see the rest, see the witness, and done. Not have to watch a video deposition or read the deposition, but that's just me. I do not speak for other commission members, and we have to have the parties consent to that, so I'm going to welcome other commission members.
I think it would be one of the commissioners that we have an obligation at 2 o'clock. As well, so I don't know that we can frame it as such, considering where we are at this point.
You can make that up.
We got 4.
Right, so the question is, can the commission maybe until 2 o'clock and try to get it all in?
I think we're pressing ourselves if we say we're gonna try to do that based upon 4 of us having commitments. My suggestion to you, Mr. Hicks, would be, I don't need a videotape. I'm not gonna speak for anybody else who sits on this commission. And even if you were to do a videotape deposition, you still have to do a transcript. So my suggestion would be just do a deposition transcript, get it to us before the hearing. We're all capable of reading and see what the testimony says. I wouldn't go through the expense.
No advice, I appreciate that.
Yep. All right, we want to take just a 5-minute recess, so Mr. Bright can check and see if we've got a court report available for this afternoon.
Sure.
Thank you.
Like it's got no bearing on.
That's how we was it relates to those.
It's up to the executive director to step up and do
No, no, no.
I'm gonna call Mr. Brennan.
I took 2 different doors and still same thought.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I mean, I hear what you're saying.
That's normally the way it works.
Right.
If I do that, that's the first order of business. So you'll get past that first. So I don't know.
Me, I look at that as our opinion, the whole.
Well, I never just, I'm saying.
I'm the one who only make us. Said that. You know, I think eventually was pretty bored.
Right, right, that's exactly right. Better than I'm being a bit dumb.
So I'm bringing that up.
Well, I didn't read the.
I think some stuff we can, they can recommend to the work that they do. Because he's already just record issues.
So I'll say something that's you realize. Well, he's saying he didn't want to see the wash. I say wash it because then we're getting the dust. That's just notion that I.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know this is all of the other.
And it's 7.
Why don't we just do that? Why don't we do that?
That's more shot. Of each.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, you're not allowed to say that.
Giving you the, yeah.
That is worse.
These are, those have all things that are submitted by the internet, right? And that is organized. So, and so.
Is that?
Everything he submitted last night, everything I've already submitted.
I was gonna say.
Text recognition and searchable and bookmark.
So that's all the stuff that they use.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
It's on everything.
Because originally I started having problems.
Well, okay, well, that's it, all of that stuff on there. If I gave you Is that a given event? Yeah, so you can have the commercials, the video and audio that's on there also. And it includes everything that Mr. Bray submitted yesterday.
Yeah.
Also on there. I just merged this one document. And so now it's searchable and it's bookmarked. Okay. Based on a 3 file piece of it. Okay, so this bookmark for the 3 things just to be the 3 file. All right, okay.
I had told my secretary, told her.
Okay.
So hopefully by the end of the year, I mean, I'm not.
Right, yeah, we can go on and deal with it. Yeah.
I don't know if that's good. Yeah. That's why I think that's fine. You know, I think that's okay. I'll do it. I should be yours as possible. Walking and talking by.
Which time do
Any time of day, there's no traffic. The rush hour might be a little worse.
At 2, yeah. Yes, around 1:30. Yeah.
I need to get there at 1, my meter runs out.
Yeah, you got it.
Have you used that from Columbus app?
I have not.
Our IT guy told me about it. It really very well. It's very cool that you can sit here on your
I can
phone
adjust it.
and you can add money right to it.
I just don't do it that frequently to think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's once a month. I come down here. I probably should have just got out of the house.
I thought that's what you heard.
Yeah, that's what we said.
I never won the supporters, but we both get it.
Pardon?
I never won the supporters be reader, but we both get it.
Yeah, that's a technical violation right there.
Not
My
if
credit card.
he gives you $1 back right now. You that's exchange.
For here?
Yeah.
No. Because my office is in Peru, so I always just hop on the ski lift.
Right.
Well, I figure, you know, for those times when the year
I'll pay it.
Stepping away.
I don't get it because I don't want to be here appropriately, so I just don't have it. That's what you can only do for business or not law for these.
So are we
Well,
about
attempted.
I think we can, that's the chair's responsibility.
It's in the back of our, it just seems to me that the first motion is now moved since they're going to have this at 3 o'clock.
Do they have that?
I have my secretary making those arrangements. I've asked her to email me as soon as they get in contact. I will, hopefully I will have an email saying something to move before the end of the motion.
Okay.
Okay, there's been a request that there's been a request that we actually address the motion to use rate first, right first. We address that motion first. We want to agree with it, and
You'd be gone.
Good day, sir. And I apologize for not necessarily taking that into consideration. I just gotta put them in order and.
yeah.
But alternatively, as an administrative agency in the state of Ohio, this commission jurisdiction and responsibilities are laid out in statute. ability to assess cases, make findings, et cetera. And at least in my opinion, as it relates to this circumstance, I mean, certainly we have a motion for it, the motion was made, but I don't believe we have the authority or ability to act on that motion. That is an issue between Mr. Bride, his client, and the Supreme Court of the State of Ohio, and an administrative agency such as ourselves, whose authority derives from its statutory layout of authority, doesn't have the authority to step into that breach or make that kind of determination. That's at least my belief and approach.
With that being said, if Mr. Hicks is continuing to want to pursue this, Mr. accused, I would think that they would have to file an action then in the Court of Common Pleas in Franklin County.
No, I believe it would be with the Supreme Court, because that's, that's the ultimate judge of that kind of responsibility, that will be.
Well, if he's truly interested in pursuing that some type of motion like that, I think all the other motions have to be stayed. And the hearing is going to have to be held because that's a fundamental first, whether or not Mr. Bright can continue this action.
Who did the drive respond?
Well, I think first of all, Mr. Hicks should probably reply to that. Is this something you're still really interested in pursuing?
So I think that Mr. Bray has significant divided loyalties, including his representation of Jeffrey Longstreth previously, his representation of Ohioans for Energy Security that's mentioned in the Larry Householder indictment and his payment through that, and his representation of Susan Jonathan Allen Freeman. So I think that I would withdraw the motion, but I will ask when any of these people testify that they would waive any conflict of interest that they have, so that we are sure that the people that he is representing are aware of these conflicts, including, for example, that he was compensated for work with Larry Householder's Enterprises as referenced in the indictment. It's not directly referenced in the Larry Householder indictment, it references a law firm, but if you then go look and see all the filings, they were all made by Don relating to Ohio's for Energy Security. So I'm withdrawing my motion. But I will ask that witnesses stipulate that they waive any conflict involving Mr. Bray when they're testifying.
I don't mean to interrupt you, I think sort of in a siloed way.
Okay.
So the motion to have him recused, I agree with our executive director. I don't think we as a state agency can address that.
Okay.
We don't have that legal authority. So I'm not sure that it's before us. I think Mr. Norman's point is correct, that if you really want to pursue that, and you want to go to a jurisdictional body who does, which we're not in a position to advise you of, one choice would be for us to stay the proceedings to allow you to do that. And I think the commission, we would certainly, can't speak for the commission, but we would certainly consider that. One choice is we could just say we don't have jurisdiction. We can allow you to withdraw the motion so that there's no stigma attached to whatever that is, and you can do whatever it is you want to do with that. But as it relates to whether there are conflicts of interest between Mr. Brian and his clients, or what his clients think about those relationships, that really is not within our parameters. Normally that's not sort of within the kind of parameters that a witness could testify or stipulate to. So I just want you, I just think it's outside the scope. Not that I don't think that you could have like the pursuit of someone, which is not the place, and what we're suggesting, I think we just don't have the ability to do.
So I've already, just for a second, so I appreciate that. For sake of time purposes and the 2 o'clock in the parking meter, I've already stated that I would withdraw the motion.
But when you stated your withdrawal, you also put stipulations on it about waivers, and I'm not sure we're in the position.
So I would state that I will withdraw the motion. What I stipulated was that I want to make sure that the clients that he's representing, that they are aware. But that would be, I think, typically normal that a client would waive the conflict if they engage an attorney that has a significant conflict of interest, that the attorney under the professional rules would have to disclose to the client that they had a interest. I want to make sure that that has taken place in this case. That's all I meant by those remarks.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to keep moving here, I would withdraw the motion.
Part of the problem I have that is you're asking to jump into attorney-client privilege and what they
Not at all, I'm asking only that the client, that he has, that the client, let me just keep it very simple here. Because we can talk about this, or we can talk about the other six motions,
Right,
and I withdraw the motion,
thank you.
Thank you.
okay?
Thank you.
What is the next motion on our agenda?
First private motion to quash the Stephen Allen Freeman.
I apologize for doing that. He has made false and defamatory accusations against me. He's accused me of unethical behavior. He stated that I should be indicted. He has stated that I should be criminally prosecuted. He stated that I'm an unethical lawyer. And then he withdraws the motion and doesn't give me a chance, First of all, I didn't respond to the motion, in part because it was frivolous. What he has stated is a pack of lies and conjectures and innuendos from beginning to end. He conjectures who I represented, what I said to them, what I didn't say to them, and then demanded, apparently he's withdrawn it, that he needs, not me, which is my duty as an attorney to my client, to identify any potential client conflicts I have and obtain a waiver if I need one, and not to obtain a waiver if I don't need one. That's an attorney-client privilege communication, not something he has an opportunity to write to ask my witnesses about. And you have seen his emails every weekend. He sends emails to Mr. Richter. He sent emails to a couple of commissioners who Mr. Richter told him it was unlawful for him to do that. He told Mr. Richter, you're an idiot. You don't know the law. I can send it to him many days because I'm not talking to you. And he kept doing it. And every single email he's seen, he's made accusations against my clients that are lies. He's made accusations against me that are lies. He's made accusations against Bill Richter that are lies. He's defamed his commission. He's defamed the Secretary of State. And now he posts this thing and says, well, Don Bry has these big issues. Well, I got to tell you, I'm pleased that he withdrew his frivolous motion. But this kind of stuff is not what the commission is doing. And now that I've had my say, he can file whatever he wants to, but I'm not going to divulge attorney-client communications or even communication with people who never became my client. And a lot of people he says I represented in there, I never represented. A lot of things he's assuming I said in there, I never did, because this is what he does. He has hearsay, unsubstantiated allegations, speculation, conjecture with a heavy dose of that attached to that. And you see that in all of his communications, all of his motive, in all of his oral presentation. And this is not a fishing expedition, and I'd like to get off that, but I felt as personal privilege. I want to be able to respond to the, he's not a professional, therefore he can't get a disbarred for that or have discipline for him. But it's certainly his courteous conversation. I understand people who aren't lawyers, who are pro se, can occasionally trip up. And when they trip up, it's appropriate. But I got to tell you, there's all the window homes for it. Even a dog distinguishes between being tricked over and being tricked. Having started, which motion should I address first?
Alan Freeman.
Okay, the Alan Freeman motion is basically combines three issues. One, Alan Freeman did not answer the interrogatories under oath. Instead, I, as Alan Freeman's lawyer, said, he doesn't have to answer anything under oath because Alan Freeman is a respondent to a complaint that you filed charging Alan Freeman with statutes that are criminal statutes, potentially. And the Ohio Elections Commission is perceived, we think of them as civil or administrative in a large part, but they're also criminal. In other words, they have a combined aspect of it because everything that is said or done here can result in a criminal referral. And everything that's said and done here can be used against the party. This is not an issue as it is in a purely civil case in front of the police court. And that's why this commission has a rule, which is passed for a long time. The rule is currently Ohio Administrative Code 3517-1-1 B4B, which says you don't have to testify if you're a respondent, unless you want to testify. If we call them as part of our case, then Mr. Hicks will have an opportunity to cross-examine it. But if we don't, he won't. And by the way, I've been doing this for a while. I've been practicing 40 years. And I've been before the Elections Commission over 30 years. And I was the very first case in which they figured out that Ohio's Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, prohibited them from calling the respondent, prohibited the plaintiff from calling the respondent in their case when I was representing former Governor Wood. And they didn't like it necessarily, because you always like as a tribunal to get as much information as you can. But they recognized they had a duty, as this commission still has a duty, to allow people not to testify who are respondents accused of violating criminal statute, which is what I think is accusations are nonsense. And you know, we'll go through the hearing, and hopefully the commission will see it that way too. But nonetheless, we don't have to give the shot at trying to continue to harass and depose and subpoena and you know, do all kinds of press releases and testify in his deposition that everything he files here, he can't go to the papers. You know, geez, that is a problem. You know, and the motion to quash the trial subpoena is filed not because Alan Freeman is not in the meeting, but because he doesn't have a right to require him to be here to testify. The memo of contract, which is the same reasoning of his motion to compel answering the interrogatories under oath, is because the respondent doesn't have to answer the interrogatories unless he wants to. And the motion for sanction because he didn't show up at his deposition. By the way, I have several emails that went to Mr. Hicks saying, we're not going to be there. You don't have a right to do this. We're not going to be there. And he says, well, you've got to be there unless you follow the motion. Well, I don't think so. You know, we told him we weren't going to be there. You know, he decided he wanted to say, well, you should have been there. This is the problem. Well, it's not a problem. The only problem is that Mr. Hicks wants to embarrass and humiliate Alan Freeman for fair reasons or foul. I understand. You know, if you don't have a political agenda in bringing an Ohio Elections Commission to people, you probably waste your time. Obviously, you have a political agenda, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You know, and this is because for the most part, you can't get money out of it. You cannot recover money the way you can in a civil action here for the most part. So you generally, obviously, hopefully what you bring is in good faith. I don't think so here, but hopefully it's going to bring something in good faith. But if they didn't have a political reason to do it, they probably wouldn't be doing it. So I'm not objecting to the fact that Mr. Hicks has political agenda behind what he's doing. I mean, that's common in this case. What I am objecting to is that there is a just and an unjust way even to fight political warfare. And you fight political warfare here by making a complaint based upon allegations that you have know are true, or exhibits that show that they're true, by not misrepresenting what the evidence is, by not slandering your opponent or their counsel, you know, just because you feel like it, and not repeatedly trying to force people to testify when they don't have to. And for these reasons, I would respectfully request that our motion to quash the trial subpoena for Alan Freeman be granted. And that the motion to compel Alan Freeman to testify under oath by interrogatory or to punish him for not testifying under oath that it is unlawfully noticed deposition should also be behind Mr. Hicks' motion with respect to those. Any questions? Otherwise, I think Mr. Hicks is not.
I think you've taken it where I was about to go, which was the commission's pleasure that, you know, would also, as you present and as Mr. Hicks presents, but also have, it seems that they deal with the same set of facts. The other two motions, which would be Mr. Hicks's motions to compel Mr. Freeman and also Mr. Hicks's motion regarding sanctions against Mr. Freeman. So in your presentation and arguments, addressing the same set of facts and arguments that end to address all three.
I am. It's all the same thing. Either Mr. Freeman has the right not to testify as a respondent in a case with criminal allegations and bribes.
Is there any objection by any member of the commission and you think that the way the presentation would address all three motions?
I have no objection, but I would say, I know there are some bruising egos and emotions here. Let's limit ourselves to the facts and what we're here about as opposed to commentary.
Okay. Did you have any more on these three sets of motions?
No, other than to say that the commentary that I had is because one reason the grant motion is quashed is it brought only for harassment and improper purposes. And so the reason I included that in my presentation on this motion was because I think there's plenty of evidence that is not true.
Thank you.
So I'm going to try to compartmentalize, even though we're discussing together each of the motions, okay?
Yes, please.
And so the first one is the motion to quash out the subpoena. It's my very strong understanding that in a civil process, I might be corrected. In a criminal process, you have the right to not go under oath at any time, not take the stand. But in a civil process, you take the stand and then you assert your right on the stand, under oath. Not that you can just say, and I would remind people what it says in your rules. I'm not quoting them exactly, but I think I'm pretty very close. It doesn't say, it says you can refuse to answer the questions. That would imply that you're being asked questions, that then you refuse to answer, or you have an objection to the question, or you're assert your Fifth Amendment privilege. So the notion I'm just addressing the first one, okay? The motion to quash Alan Freeman's, is that I also understand the civil process, questions that he might be asked, like, where do you live? Where do you live? Those are not things you can object to. Okay, so those are not, don't have any criminal culpability involved with them. You can't assert the Fifth in a civil process on those kinds of questions. So this is misplaced and it's a misuse of the rules, I believe, because, I would also want to point out that we had that long Zoom meeting about the order of this commission. And never during that whole time did Mr. Bray assert that, well, this doesn't matter because he's not actually going to respond. Now, I'm talking about a different issue here, but I'm going to come back. I'm trying to be very compartmental. So on the motion to quash his witness subpoena, I would also like to point out, he already filed an affidavit into the case, a sworn affidavit. This probably waived his right to assert the Fifth, at least the subject matter contained in the affidavit he already filed into the case. So the notion of that if he wishes to take a stand and assert his Fifth Amendment right, then he can do so. But I think this causes an issue because he already filed an affidavit into this case, a sworn affidavit. So he already testified. And he can't now say that he refuses to testify in the matter. So that's the first one. That's just I'm being very simplistic here. I could go deeper on these things. That's just the first one. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for me on the first one before I go to the second one? Okay, so what was the second one? I just want to make sure. So I'm on my list here. The motion to compel on interrogatories. So that's where I kind of went off a little bit under the side there of that long meeting we had to negotiate a order, which I actually appreciated very much, negotiating an order of the commission. Never did Mr. Bray say that this doesn't matter because my client is not going to respond. My understanding, very clear understanding on my part, that I'm not a lawyer, but that when in interrogatories in a civil proceeding, he has to answer each question. He can object on each question, but he has to answer even with an objection. And then he has to submit back a signed and notarized response to the interrogatories. He can't say, well, my lawyer just sent in a note that's not even notarized saying I'm not going to respond to anything. So if I look at the civil rules and I investigate it myself, I think that's not even hard, that he has to on this. I don't even know why it's an issue. Why wouldn't it just shows the consternation here? If he wants to object to every interrogatory asked, and some of them are things that he can't object to because they are questions just about, I don't know that I have a question where you live, I don't know, but those kind of questions that are not, that have any criminal culpability associated with them, even if they were answered, and he can't not answer those questions in a civil matter. But the thing that's just so astounding to me is, why wouldn't he just then send back a signed and notarized set of interrogatories with object, right? Why go through this rope-a-dope where after that whole negotiation of an order that we're sitting here and he won't submit a response to interrogatory with an objection by question or an answer by question. Okay, so that's the second one. Let's see if does anybody have any questions for me on that one? So the third one was the motion regarding sanctions and the deposition. I would like to point out that when I was deposed, I requested to have a contemporaneous copy of my deposition. And Mr. Bray sent copious emails saying, no, can't do it, illegal, improper, no way, okay? And then I did. He never filed an actual motion to stop it, but he tried to put tremendous pressure on me that I couldn't do it. He did the same thing with my request to depose Alan Freeman. So I requested to depose Alan Freeman. I had a properly served request to depose Alan Freeman. He sent a bunch of emails to me and Director Ricker saying, no. Emails aren't motions. It's a shield and a sword thing here, like you see, I think, I'm glad we got it worked out that way to hear from a court reporter, this shield and sword thing where, you know, he doesn't respond to me on the deposition of his office, but now it's on. But he doesn't actually have a court reporter aligned, nor did he ever come back to me say, make sure you get a court reporter aligned. So on the third one, on the motions for sanctions, I had cost of whatever was in there, I think 100. It was either 150, 170, I don't remember off the top of my head. A court reporter appearance fee, and I had to pay a rental fee for the room that it was in. So if Mr. Bray was not, and I informed him again and again, if you are not going to be, if you are objecting to this, you should file a motion to quash my request for deposition. Now, I just keep sending threatening emails to me and the director, and this, to me, I'm trying to avoid any personal commentary, but and this is, to me, there's got to be messages sent here that this is kind of ridiculous, that parties should be expected to work things out in the discovery process without every little thing coming before the commission. And I don't think I've been the problem. I did my deposition. I file motions on things I want to quash. I don't send, you might not like my emails. A lot of people don't like my emails, so that's, but when it comes to an official thing, I file a motion to quash the deposition. Not just send bullying emails to people telling them I'm not going to show up, you're illegal, it can't happen. So I think that I should be granted sanctions for the direct out-of-pocket cost I had for that. And it's a little bit of a lesson, Mr. Bray, is that if you objected to the deposition, you should have filed a motion to quash the deposition, not just send threatening email saying you're not going to show up and this is illegal and it violates the Constitution or whatever the heck. So those are, I try to compartmentalize each of the three. So I think that a motion to quash Alan Freeman as a witness should be denied. I think that the motion to compel him to answer his interrogatories should be granted. He can object to every one, but he has to respond, and he has to send back, in my view, he has to send back something where he is sworn under oath, and he can object under oath to all those questions. And that one, again, I don't mean to be redundant here, but I just go back to the absurdity of we had that like 2 hours negotiating an order. And when that was the intent, that he was never even going to respond in the first place, which, by the way, I'm a pain in the ass, I admit it. I tell my son, don't grow up like Dad. Be different from me. It's not a good way to live. But I've always been the same kind of person, and I never would have done such a disingenuous thing as to be on a 2 hour, or whatever it was, hour, 2 hours negotiating an order that I had no intent of following. I followed every aspect of that order to the T, including sitting for my own deposition and making the arrangements and so on and so forth. And so I think that I should, and obviously, I do want to make sure that I'm done then, but I want to make one, unless there's any question, is Mr. Bray said something very close to the effect of, you don't bring a complaint here unless you have a political agenda. You don't have a political, and I understand that. I know Brian Schreiber, I know people in Cincinnati that love to do complaints here. Okay, but I'm not that. I am a citizen activist that believes in what you're all supposed to believe in. The integrity, the importance and integrity of campaign finance reporting. And so when I see such brazen things taking place, you know, that's why I know I have my editorials, but we can't let this stand in Ohio. We cannot let this stand in Ohio. We can't let it stand on Larry House order, but we can't let it stand trickle down in that system. And I think there should be more people like me that are willing to dedicate so much time, so much energy, and so much money to something like this. The only way I told somebody, man, if I would have put a lawyer on this, how much money would I have spent so far? And I'm just a citizen trying to get honest financial reporting for candidates in my own district. So I apologize for the editorial there. But I think on the three motions, again, just to wrap up, motion to quash and being a witness, deny, motion to compel on him giving a correct, proper interrogatory response, granted. Motion for sanctions to reimburse me for just the direct out-of-pocket expenses that I incurred by an appearance fee and a room rental. The beauty is I didn't have a lawyer, right? So I'm not saying, hey, I need a legal bill paid by somebody. So it's a minimal amount of money that's involved. So that's, I don't know if there's any questions for me, but otherwise that's my position on those three topics.
Respond.
I may misled you about the political candidate. Every single one of my clients, whenever we bring them, there's no political agenda, and that's purely because they are concerned about the integrity and importance of the political process. And I said that with straight face. Let's go through in order I counted 5 arguments that he made. The first argument he made is that this is basically civil procedure in which you can object to some questions, but not to object to answering them at all. And that's true for people who aren't respondents. You know, someone who is not a respondent has to answer questions unless there are particular questions that would be incriminating to them. Similarly, someone who is in a civil court has to answer questions unless there are particular questions that would be incriminating to them. But that is not true where it is here, even if you call it reporting a civil procedure, it's a criminal procedure for purposes of self-incrimination protection. Whereas here, the statutory scheme includes punitive elements, the ability to refer to criminal prosecution, that negate any connotation that it is purely civil in process. It is not purely civil in process. It's never been purely civil in process. And that is why you have a rule that incorporates the protections that were already in the Ohio Constitution, even before the rule of commission was enacted. That you can, in fact, as I think I cited some reports there, that when you got the self-incrimination protection, the accused cannot be called for cross-examination without his consent. And that's true whether the cross-examination is in the form of calling him as a witness at hearing, imposing him, or having him sign answers to questions that are owed.
That hold true if you submit an affidavit, is you no longer subject to those?
Very
Provided an affidavit.
Very good question. Very good question. My second argument. The affidavit that we filed in connection with a preliminary review stage. And the reason we did that is because this commission has a rule that says if you don't file an affidavit under oath, we will assume everything the complaint said is true and find against you. That's what your rule says. That's not a voluntary waiver, even if it were written. Secondly, if you take a look at the hearing exhibit submissions that were filed yesterday, we have not filed or identified that affidavit as any of the documents that we are going to present. Yes, he can present it as a statement of party if he wants to, but it is not a document that we are going to present in hearing, or it's not a document that we're going to ask the commission to rely upon in any way at the hearing. To answer your question directly, that is, there are different courts that go different ways about whether if you submit after hearing an affidavit. But there are no courts that say if you submit an affidavit, say to the police department earlier in the process, therefore they can examine you under oath at the criminal hearing if you don't want to.
I appreciate the ability to not self-incriminate yourself, but I think when you submit an affidavit, you have a minimal open yourself up to examination as to those sworn statements that you've already provided and you provided to this commission.
Well, with all due respect, if this commission is coercing the providing of them, it's already violated 50 minutes. In other words, here's good luck. You cannot hold against the party the fact that they failed to testify. That's also a provision of the 50 minutes.
But he did testify when he filed an affidavit.
And you said that if you didn't do it, hold against him. You said in your own rule, if you don't file an affidavit, we will hold against you. Your rules state that if the respondent fails to file a response under oath, the commission can treat everything that the complaint said as true and find against it.
Or you objected, plead the fifth at that time.
Well, it's a little late, whether you file or not, you have already opened yourself up to having it get filed against you.
In this case, you had counsel can make statements on behalf, and those aren't subject to cross-examination. At the preliminary hearing, counsel can get up and state what they want on behalf of their client, and that's not their client testifying, correct?
Counsel unless counsel is sworn, that's not evidence, it's argument. I can make objections on behalf of my client. But the notion that there is a waiver because of an affidavit was filed, not at the hearing, but at a preliminary stage.
But at the preliminary stage, we often have counsel who get up and submit motions on their client without having to submit an affidavit. And that's sufficient before this commission, is it not?
That is not what the rule says. It is not what the rule says. I mean, I apologize if I follow the rules rather than following the practice, but I think I'm entitled to do that. And the rules, if the rules are taken literally, as you know, you cannot say, you don't have to testify this hearing, but if you do, we're going to find against you. And that's what your rules say. you know, they said, okay, you don't have to file an affidavit under oath at the preliminary stage, but if you do, we're going to hold it against you. And we have the right and we're to treat everything that the other side said is true. And to make a finding against you based upon it. That is not a voluntary waiver. And I understand maybe you let people get away with doing things that are other than what you will say, but I don't think you can punish my client for realizing that he's between a rock and a hard place. If he doesn't file this, he's going to lose the preliminary stage, and if he doesn't file the road, he's going to lose the preliminary stage. I mean, that's kind of, you know, I'm sorry, you wouldn't say that. I don't think they should. And if you change the rules and made it clear, as they used to say, in a prior iteration of the Elections Commission rules, that if you are responding, you do not have to file under oath, and you can respond in a different fashion. Those rules were changed, and the current rules are coercive, not permissive. You know, the argument would be different if it was a permissive affidavit that would not be held against you. Then if it's a coercive affidavit, it will be held against you. Fully part of the fact, for the permissive or coercive, it's not part of the hearing. And there's no waiver at that stage, and we haven't included it as part of our record. We're not going to submit his testimony by affidavit. I don't try to do that. Maybe if we try to do that at the hearing, it'll be a different issue. But that's not the issue we have today. Thirdly, there was an objection as to, you know, Mr. Hicks says that we agreed to respond to the interrogatory. Now, there are two ways to respond to interrogatories. One is to answer them under oath, which is signed by the person sworn, and the other is to object to them, which is signed by the lawyer as to objection. You know, frequently you have interrogatories where you have objection to some things and answer to other things, and so you have both the signature of the lawyer as to the objection and the swearing under oath as to the answer. We did respond. Our response was, we had a self-incrimination right not to answer anything, we're not going to. You know, that was our response. And since there was no answer as part of our response, since our response was purely the objection, the right to object that we asserted, you know, the client didn't even sign or swear. The clients don't swear to objection to counsel. That's not what happened. Well, and by the way, there's nothing in the commission's rules that tells or suggests to anybody or gives us fair warning. If we file an affidavit as you require at the preliminary stage, you're going to waive rights to self-incrimination. There's nothing in the rule about self-incrimination that states that if you have filed an affidavit, we will then require you to testify and deem you have to waive at least as to the affidavit your rights against self-incrimination. You can't just treat this stuff cavalierly by having rules that coerce an affidavit at the preliminary stage and then saying, oh, guess what? We didn't tell you. But now we're going to hold it till you can be cross-examined left, right, up, down, and sideways about anything that's in that affidavit. And in that affidavit, as Mr. Hicks interprets, it's a fairly wide area.
But you know what I don't like?
What?
Is we spent 2 hours at the last commission hearing about making sure you put it in the proper form of interrogatories and scheduling depths and doing all this. And you could have just said, he's not going to appear. He's not going to testify. He's not going to answer questions. He's going to object. And then we could have saved this commission's entire time listening to all that. If I were to do that in my civil practice, I would have a judge up and down my throat going, what the hell are you doing, Mr. Norman? Why did you make them go through all these gyrations and then say, I'm not appearing?
Well, frankly, I was surprised with that being right. I thought he'd waited right to get it on our president's going after doctor.
That didn't answer my question.
Which we did respond to. You know, but, you know, I think that one of the commissioners, I thought it was you, maybe I'm mistaken, said that obviously you can make objections and then we'll deal with them there.
You can, but if you knew that your client was not going to respond to them, why did we waste all that time getting to the point that we're going to finally have Mr. Hicks submit interrogatories and request for productions and do a notice of deposition if you knew all along from the very get-go, from day one, that he wasn't going to appear? Why didn't you just say to the commission, he's not going to appear, and then he could have filed a motion to compel?
With all due respect, Mr. Norman, I don't believe the deposition was discussed at all in motion chair. I don't recall that being discussed.
Correct, that's true.
Okay.
You know, and that came up later, and I responded several times. You know, he didn't argue that it was an emotion sealed part of it. He's argued that we agreed to respond to properly issue. I think someone mentioned 33 and 34, which includes both interrogatories and document requests. But frankly, I wasn't even thinking about interrogatories because I thought it was obvious that we didn't have to answer those. I was thinking about, well, respond to document requests, which we did.
I get it as to not showing up for depositions. We do all the time. We're not gonna be there. Don't go through the time and expense of getting a room or report or whatever. That's practical.
Right.
If they tell you they're not coming, don't waste your time and money.
Then we talk.
But if we're sitting here and you're saying, submit it, instead of doing these as a subpoena, submit it as interrogatories and requests for production, you could have said to us at the hearing, my client is not gonna answer those questions.
Your Honor, I never said at that hearing, submit these as interrogatories. It may have been a reference to 33 and 34, but that didn't come out of my mouth. I was talking about document requests. If you look at the transcript, you'll see that what I was talking about was responding to documents. And, we talked about it, obviously you said that.
And I may not be remembered correctly, but there was a series of questions also. And you said, I sent you the forms, here are the forms, put it in those forms, which would have been interrogatories and a request for production.
That may have been.
And if that's the case, you could have cut this all up at the pass from the very get-go and said, my client's not going to answer them. And it would have saved our time, his time, your time.
With all due respect, Mr. Commissioner, it wouldn't have, because part of it dealt with exhibits, not just about the interrogatories. And the exhibits actually did require the order, it did require the response. And I'm sorry that you feel that I misled you. I didn't intend to. And there are all sorts of, there are arguments I could make today about dismissing the whole thing. You don't dismiss the whole thing because of all sorts of reasons. But I'm not making those arguments today because that's not what I'm focused. And that's not what you're asking me to be. Maybe there are other arguments about why his interrogatories were bad, but it is for two reasons, not just one. And that the document requests were bad for one reason. But I didn't think that level of, we weren't getting in the weeds that much. I know that I enjoy hearing myself talk more than other people because I have to talk more than that. More than I like to hear myself talk to get as much in terms of details. I mean.
So, Mr. Brett, I'm going to request that you get to your point number 4. We've been through 1, 2, and 3. We've been through 2 twice, maybe 3